Time is a strange river. It not only sweeps away youth but also erodes the memories we thought were eternal, only to reveal truths so raw they are heartbreaking. At this age of 82, looking back, I realize the greatest lesson life has taught me. The deepest scars are sometimes not inflicted by strangers, but are carved by the very ones we love the most. And this is my true story, a lesson written in bitter betrayal, right in the very place where I spent a lifetime nurturing love. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because some truths need to be spread, even if they might shake your beliefs. Some stories, no matter how painful, must be told. My name is Clara Miller, though I was born a Thompson. This story I'm about to tell you happened 3 years ago in Roanoke, Virginia, the city where I was born, raised, and where I learned in the worst way possible that sometimes your own flesh and blood can be more poisonous than a rattlesnake bite. It was right here, at Roanoke General Hospital, that my son Martin, a lawyer with a degree, an educated man raised on the sweat of my brow, left me after gallbladder surgery, promising to return the next day with clean clothes and my documents. But his eyes, the eyes always tell the truth the mouth hides. There was something in that last look, a quick shift, a strange glint that my mother's heart caught, but my head insisted on ignoring. Do you see? A mother's heart can be so foolish at times. It senses a lie but still chooses to cling to a promise. I chose to believe my son's words instead of the coldness in his eyes. That was my first mistake, and the most painful one. As I looked out the hospital window at the Blue Ridge Mountains surrounding Roanoke, I wondered how many other Claras were being forgotten across America. And you, who are listening to me now, where are you from? Tell me in the comments what city you're following my story from. Who knows, maybe there's a Clara near you who needs someone to notice she exists. The first 3 days were a fever dream of hope. Every rattle of a cart in the hallway, every squeak of a door, every male voice that echoed from the corridor shot a bolt of electricity through me. Martin. My heart would leap, and my hands, frail and trembling, would instinctively fly to my thin hair, trying to pat it into some semblance of order. But the hope was a cruel visitor. It would arrive in a rush and leave just as quickly, replaced by the mocking tick of the round clock on the wall. Its hands didn't just mark time. They scraped away layers of my dignity with each lazy circle. The doctor had discharged me. The stitches were healing. My body was ready. But my life was on hold, waiting for a son who wasn't coming. Mrs. Miller, do you have any other relatives we can call? The social worker's question felt like a slap in the face. Did I? Of course I did. A daughter in Richmond, another son in Chicago. But if Martin, who lived 10 minutes away, hadn't come back, why would the others come from so far away? I know you must be wondering about my other 2 children. Alas, modern life can pull children so far from a parent's embrace. Their silence wasn't the cruelty of Martin's, but a quiet indifference, the dull ache of being forgotten. And sometimes, being forgotten stings just as sharply as a blade. Room 213 was small but clean, one of those simple accommodations that Medicaid provides, an iron bed with a plastic-covered mattress that made a noise every time I moved, a beige metal locker with a jammed door, where I kept the only bag I had brought. Inside it, just a worn-out nightgown, a toothbrush, a comb, and my recipe book covered in calico fabric, my companion for 40 years. A small bedside table where they left the meals I could barely swallow. A narrow, awning-style window, from which you could see a small piece of the city and the silhouette of the Mill Mountain Star in the background, like a silent witness to my humiliation. Sharon was the first to see beyond the abandoned old lady. A nurse for 25 years, she had seen everything in that hospital, but she said that cases like mine hurt her heart more than the worst emergencies. It was she who brought me a bar of lavender-scented soap so you don't have to use this hospital one that dries out your skin. It was she who, on the 5th day, sat with me during her break and listened to me talk about my 3 children. You know, dear, I said softly, as she was listening to my story. Please, call me Clara. Sharon smiled warmly. Of course, Clara. I'd be honored. Despite her kindness, she must have seen this story before. Sometimes the smartest ones are the ones who hurt us the most, Clara, she said, adjusting my sheet, because they know exactly where it hurts the most. A week passed, and the hospital began to show signs of impatience. They needed the bed. There was a waiting list. They couldn't keep a patient who had already been discharged. The chief physician, a man with thick eyebrows and a hurried manner, spoke to me as if I were a stubborn child. "You don't have anywhere to go? Any savings? Any relatives?" I shook my head, swallowing hard. "My son, Martin, took care of my things, doctor." My small Social Security check went straight into the account he opened for me. The apartment where I lived was rented. He paid for it, said it was better that way. The doctor frowned, scribbled something in my chart, and left, muttering about contacting social services. It was on that same day that Sharon came with the news that confirmed my worst suspicions. "Clara," Sharon said, her voice gentle but firm, and the use of my first name told me the news was bad. "I sent someone to your apartment. It's empty." The building manager said Martin handed over the keys 5 days ago. He told them you had gone to live with him across town. In that single moment, the story shifts from tragic neglect to a chilling, calculated plot. How does a person even begin to fight back when their own child has tried to erase their very existence? Stick with Clara's story to see how the deepest betrayals can sometimes forge the most unexpected strengths. The words didn't just sting, they detonated something inside me. This wasn't simple abandonment, it was a plan. A cold, calculated erasure. In that single moment, the buzzing in my head became the sound of my world shattering. People think the worst thing is to be forgotten, but it's not. The worst thing is to realize you weren't just a burden to be discarded, you were a problem to be solved, a trail to be wiped clean. My breath hitched, my stomach felt like it was filled with stones. A pain so vast bloomed in my chest that it left no room for tears or screams, only the chilling silence of betrayal in its purest form. The days that followed turned into a strange routine. Early in the morning, before the shift change, I would make the bed perfectly, tucking the sheet at the corners as I learned from my mother, and sit properly in the visitor's chair. The cafeteria staff already knew me. They always left a little extra coffee in my cup. The janitors would chat with me while they mopped the floor, telling me about the soap operas, their problems with their children, the difficulties of life. When the doctors came on their rounds, I tried to appear healthy and lucid, afraid they would send me away, or worse, to some nursing home. At night, after the lights in the hallway were turned off, I would open my recipe book in the dim light of the emergency lamp and reread the yellowed pages, not for the recipes themselves, but for the little notes I had jotted in the margins over the years. Loaned $500 to Martin for his law school graduation suit. The 10th of May, 1986, Martin asked to transfer the deed to his father's land into his name. "It makes it easier to sell later," he said. The 5th of January, 2022. After 2 weeks, they moved me from 213. They needed the room for new patients. I was moved to a small storage room at the end of the hall, where they put an old gurney. "It's just for a few days, Mrs. Miller, until they sort out your situation," Sharon explained, helping me move. My situation? As if it were a nameless disease, an administrative problem, and not a mother who dedicated her life to her children, being thrown away like a squeezed-out orange after being used to the last drop. In the following days, I was transferred several times. Sometimes to a temporarily vacant bed, sometimes to the doctor's lounge when it wasn't in use, sometimes to a corner of the women's ward. I learned to sleep, sitting up, to speak softly, to take up as little space as possible. That night, lying in that little bed, I did not cry. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the peace of happiness, but the quiet that comes after a storm has passed and you realize you're still standing. Just to have a place to rest my head without fear, that itself was a grace. I became a ghost in slippers, wandering the hospital corridors, invisible to most, a problem for some, a burden on the system. What saved me from insanity was the routine I created. But more than the chores, it was the people. I started noticing the others who were forgotten, just like me. There was Mr. Harold in room 304, a retired railroad worker with lung cancer, whose daughter could only visit on Sundays. I began to save a piece of my bread from breakfast for him. I'd sit by his bed in the afternoons, not saying much, just being there. He'd tell me stories about the old steam engines, his voice a gravelly whisper, and for a little while, we weren't two abandoned souls in a hospital. We were just a man sharing his life and a woman listening. In comforting him, I found a strange comfort of my own. It was a flicker of purpose in the vast emptiness. I would wake up before 5 a.m., before the hustle and bustle began. I used the public restroom to wash as best I could, scooping water from the faucet with my cupped hands so as not to waste it. I would carefully comb my hair, tying it in a simple bun at the nape of my neck, and apply a little bit of lipstick that Sharon had given me. I would hide my purse and my recipe book in the laundry room closet, where one of the employees had found a little corner for me. Then I would start my chores, helping to fold clean sheets, sorting laundry by size, sometimes going to the kitchen and offering to help peel vegetables or wash dishes. No one had asked me to do it, but no one stopped me either. Little by little, I became part of the scenery, like those plants that grow in the cracks of walls. No one planted them, no one cares for them, but there they are, resisting. The worst part was the nights, when the activity subsided and silence fell over the hospital, interrupted only by the distant beeping of machines and the occasional groan of a patient. That's when the loneliness weighed most heavily. In those moments, sitting on a bench in the hallway or lying on some makeshift gurney, I would clutch my recipe book to my chest and let my mind wander to better times. I remembered my childhood in the countryside, the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the farm kitchen, my father's calloused hands stroking my hair, the toothless smile of my grandmother Genevieve, teaching me the secrets of medicinal herbs. I remembered Arthur, my late husband, a simple but honest man who died too soon, leaving 3 young children and a pile of unfulfilled dreams. I remembered the little boys running in the yard, of Naomi clinging to my skirt, asking for a story before bed. How could those same children I carried in my womb and nursed at my breast have turned into adults capable of abandoning me like this? I was nearing the 1-month mark in the hospital on a rainy Wednesday. That day, one of the younger doctors on the team, Dr. Peterson, called me for a frank conversation. "Mrs. Miller, we can't keep you here indefinitely. This is a hospital, not a shelter. We've tried to contact your other children, but the numbers we have no longer work." He seemed genuinely concerned, unlike the others who only saw an administrative problem to be solved. "The social worker is looking into a spot at a nursing home, but it could take a while. Do you have any friends, neighbors, anyone who could help temporarily?" I shook my head. My neighbors in my apartment building barely knew me. I didn't go out much. I mostly stayed at Martin's house, helping to look after my grandchildren. True friends, only the ones from Floyd. From my youth, many already deceased, others in nursing homes or living with distant children. "I understand, doctor," I replied with the dignity I had left. "You do what you can. I only ask that you don't throw me out on the street like a dog." It was on that day that I met Megan, the hospital's new social worker, recently graduated, idealistic, with that energy of someone who still believes they can change the system. Unlike the other professionals who had handled my case, she wasn't content with the information in my file. She sat with me in a small room, offered me a real cup of coffee, not that watery hospital stuff, and asked questions. Lots of questions. Where was I born? Where did I go to school? How did I meet my husband? How did I raise my children? She asked to see my documents, but I didn't have any. They were all with Martin. "You don't even have your ID?" she asked, concerned. I shook my head. My son said it was better for him to keep them, that I might lose them, that old folks get forgetful. Megan jotted something down on her clipboard, her lips pressed into a thin line. She then asked if I had any belongings, anything I had brought to the hospital. I showed her my small purse with the few things I mentioned before, and my recipe book. Her eyes lit up when she saw the book covered in colorful calico, tied with a faded ribbon. "May I see?" she asked. I hesitated. That book was more than a collection of recipes. It was my history, my life noted in the margins, between measures of flour and pinches of salt. But something in that young woman's eyes inspired my trust. I passed the book into her hands, watching her face as she flipped through the pages. It's incredible to think that a simple, stained cookbook could hold the key to justice. Clara has just handed over the only thing she has left, not knowing it's about to become her most powerful weapon. Let's see what secrets are hidden within those pages as her story continues. Handing over that book, you see, felt like I was handing over the last piece of my soul. It held more than recipes for cakes and pies. It held my whole life, my tears and my joys, recorded in the margins. I didn't know then that it would become my weapon. I only knew it was the one thing I had left my story. Her eyes widened when she saw the notes in the margins. "Mrs. Miller, you recorded everything here? Loans, promises, important dates?" I nodded. "It was my way of remembering, dear. When you get old, your memory fails, but what's written down, no one can dispute." Megan asked to keep the book for a few days, promising to take care of it as if it were a treasure. I let her, not without apprehension. It was like handing over a piece of myself. In the following days, I noticed a different kind of buzz among the hospital staff. Whispers, glances in my direction, quick smiles. Sharon, always my ally, let it slip that things were moving to resolve my situation. I didn't quite understand what that meant, but I felt a small flicker of hope sprout in my chest. Nearly 2 months after I entered that hospital for a simple gallbladder surgery, Megan appeared in the hallway where I was helping to organize the medication cart. Her face radiated a contained joy, like someone holding on to good news. "Mrs. Miller, I need to speak with you in private." She led me to the same small room as before, but this time there was someone else waiting for us. A man in his 52nds, small glasses on the tip of his nose, a leather briefcase on his lap. "This is Mr. Wallace, a volunteer lawyer from the Legal Aid Society. He's here to help you." In the next 2 hours, I discovered that my simple recipe book, with its seemingly innocent notes in the margins, was powerful evidence against my own son. The dates, the amounts, the promises recorded over the years told a story of financial manipulation that I, blinded by motherly love, had failed to see. Megan had gone above and beyond her duties. With the information from my book, she had traced bank accounts, discovered properties in my name that I didn't even know existed, and found a piece of land I inherited from my husband which, according to my notes, had been transferred to Martin's name to facilitate a sale. Except the land was never officially sold, at least not on paper. It remained in my name, but my son was collecting rent from a small house built on it without my knowledge. "Mrs. Miller," the lawyer said, closing his briefcase, "we have a solid case of embezzlement, elder financial abuse, and abandonment. Your son not only diverted your Social Security for years, but also misappropriated assets that legally belong to you. Based on the evidence that Miss Megan has collected, we can file a lawsuit immediately and request a protective order." His words sounded distant, as if he were talking about someone else, not me, not my son. A part of me wanted to deny it, to defend Martin, to say there had been some mistake. But another part, the one that woke up when Sharon said, "I don't think they're coming back," knew it was all true. I had been foolish, naive, willfully blind. And now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What happens now? Today, 3 years after that rainy Wednesday, I look out the window of my house. Yes, my house, recovered through the legal process. And I see the same glow of the Mill Mountain star that I used to watch from the small window of room 213. But the view is different now. Not just because I'm in a better place, a simple but dignified house that was legally always mine, although I didn't know it. The view is different because I am different. That Clara, too trusting, too naive, too submissive, was left behind with the white ceiling tiles I counted for so many nights. The Clara of today still carries the recipe book, still makes sweets to sell at the farmer's market, still feels her heartache when she sees a united family. But she has learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to find a strength you never knew you had. I was born in Roanoke, Virginia, on a rainy April morning in 1943, not in the city itself, but on a tobacco farm about 20 miles from here, where my father, Walter Thompson, worked as a sharecropper. Our house was simple, with a dirt floor and a roof that leaked when the rain was heavy, but it had a large yard where we planted everything: corn, beans, squash, and potatoes, and an apple tree that was my childhood joy. We were 6 siblings, 4 boys, and 2 girls, with me being the youngest. My mother, Beatrice, would wake up before sunrise to make coffee for my father to take in his lunch pail, and would only go to bed after the last child was asleep. A hard life, but an honest one, as they used to say back then. The person who truly marked my childhood was my paternal grandmother, Mrs. Genevieve. She was Irish by birth and had come to America as a young woman, fleeing the poverty that plagued her village near Dublin. She was a skilled midwife, known throughout the region. Women came from far and wide to have their babies delivered by her hands because they said a child born with Mrs. Genevieve rarely got sick. She knew every herb in the woods, every root, every leaf, and its healing powers. She always carried a small cloth bundle where she kept her dried herbs. And as we walked around the farm, she would teach me. This one here is sage, good for warding off bad luck. This is rosemary, makes a tea to improve your memory. This is peppermint, eases a stomachache. There wasn't an ailment my grandmother didn't know how to treat with her teas, her poultices, her mysterious prayers. But her greatest lesson wasn't about plants, it was about life itself. Clara, she would tell me in that thick accent she never lost, a woman has to fend for herself in this world. She has to know how to plant to eat, sew to dress, and save a little money for when times are tough. It was with her that I learned to save every last penny, to make the little I had go a long way, to never throw away what could still be useful. Life is hard on fools and even harder on women, she would repeat while teaching me how to roast coffee beans, how to make lye soap, how to tell which chicken was good for laying and which was ready for the pot. I think she already knew, with that wisdom of the old-timers, that one day I would need all this strength. School? Ah, that was a luxury for us country folk. There was a one-room schoolhouse about 2 miles from home, which I attended when farm work allowed. I learned to read, write, and do arithmetic, but most of it was through my own effort. My father didn't see much use in a girl studying. "She'll just get married and take care of a house anyway," he'd say. But my mother, secretly, encouraged me. She'd get me pencils and paper and let me study by the light of a kerosene lamp after everyone else was asleep. "An education is the one thing nobody can ever take from you," she would whisper, as if it were a secret between us. Maybe that's why I later insisted so much that my own children get an education, even when there wasn't enough food on the table. Life in the country followed its course until I was 17, when I met Arthur Miller at a church picnic on the 4th of July. He was 24, worked as a mechanic in a garage in town, wore his hair slicked back with Brill cream, and had a way of looking at me that made me flustered. Unlike the boys from the country, Arthur knew how to read newspapers, discussed politics, and spoke of a world beyond the tobacco fields and the mountains that surrounded Roanoke. "I'm going to have my own garage one day," he told me the second time we met, as we walked under the watchful eye of my mother, "and a house with a radio and one of those electric refrigerators." To a girl who grew up with kerosene lamps and food stored in tins to keep the bugs out, that sounded like a fairy tale. The courtship was quick, and the wedding even quicker. Less than a year after that picnic, there I was, in a white dress, sewn by my mother from fabric my father bought by selling a calf, walking into the little Our Lady of Mercy Catholic Church in Roanoke. I was 18, my head full of dreams, and my heart racing for that man who promised to take me out of the country and give me a better life in the city. My grandmother, Genevieve, now stooped by years and hard work, called me aside the day before the wedding to give me 2 gifts. A sprig of lavender to put in my bouquet to ward off envy, and a thick, hardcover notebook with blank pages. "For you to write down your recipes," she explained, "and also the important things in life, because our memory fails, but paper holds everything." Little did she know how important that notebook would become so many years later. We moved to Roanoke right after the wedding. Arthur rented a small house in the Oakland neighborhood, one of those with a door and a window in the front, and a little backyard where I immediately planted peppermint, basil, and lavender, an inheritance from my grandmother. He continued working at Mr. Dale's garage, now as the head mechanic, while I adapted to city life. It was hard at first. I missed the open space of the country, the sound of birds waking us up in the morning, even the smell of damp earth after the rain. But I had Arthur, I had the dream of our life together, and soon came the news that I was expecting our first child. Martin was born at home with the help of a neighborhood midwife in 1962. A strong boy with a powerful cry, who from a young age showed an impressive intelligence. Then came Naomi, in 64. delicate as a flower, always clinging to my skirt, asking for a story before bed. Finally, Logan arrived in '66 after a difficult pregnancy that almost took me from this world. 3 children, a rented house, a hard-working husband. Life wasn't easy, but it was ours. Arthur never managed to open the garage he dreamed of. Money was always tight, always stretched to cover expenses. But he was a good man. He never raised a hand to me or the children. He never came home drunk, never let the basics be wanting on our table. It was around this time that I really started using the notebook my grandmother gave me. At first, I wrote down the recipes I was learning from neighbors or hearing on the radio programs. Cornbread, apple butter, blackberry jam, cheese straws. Then, over time, I started writing things from our daily life in the margins. Martin said his first word today. Water. Arthur got a raise at the garage. We'll save up to buy a sewing machine. Naomi has had a fever for 3 days. Make peppermint tea like Grandma Genevieve taught me. It was my way of holding on to time, of not letting the small moments get lost in the rush of life. Over the years, the notebook turned yellow, the pages stained with kitchen grease, the cover worn. I covered it with a scrap of colorful calico left over from one of Naomi's dresses. I tied it with a red ribbon to keep it all together. It became almost a lucky charm. Wherever I went, it went with me. The children's education was always a priority, even when the money barely covered rice and beans. An education is the only inheritance I can leave you, I would repeat to the 3 of them, echoing what my mother used to tell me behind my father's back. While other families in the neighborhood let their children drop out of school early to help with income, I made sure mine continued. I did laundry for others, cleaned houses for wealthy ladies, sold sweets at the school gate, all to buy notebooks, pencils, uniforms. Arthur sometimes complained, "All this sacrifice for what, Clara?" Martin could already be helping me at the garage, but I stood my ground. My son's hands won't be black with grease like his father's. He's going to be a doctor or lawyer, wear a suit, work in an office with fresh air. Life went on with its ups and downs. Until, on a Tuesday in March of 1984, tragedy struck our door. Arthur was fixing a truck at the garage when the hydraulic jack failed. The vehicle fell, crushing my husband underneath. He died instantly, without even a chance to say goodbye. At 41, with 3 children still in school, I suddenly found myself a widow, unprepared, without a pension, without my footing. The owner of the garage, Mr. Dale, a good man but also tight on money, gave what he could. He paid for the funeral, gave me the equivalent of 2 months of Arthur's salary as a settlement, and said with sincere tears in his eyes, "Mrs. Miller, I'm so sorry, but I can't help any more than this." The wake was held in our small living room, with the coffin on the dining table. Neighbors brought coffee, bread, a piece of sausage, whatever they could. His colleagues from the garage came, their hands still dirty with grease, their eyes downcast, not knowing what to say. Martin, at 22, already in his 2nd year of law school in Richmond on a scholarship, thank God looked like a man with a boy's face. Naomi, 20, a student teacher, cried, hugging the rag doll her father had made for her when she was little. Logan, just turned 18 and ready to start college the following year, remained silent throughout the funeral, his eyes fixed on the coffin, as if trying to understand what had happened. When my husband died, many people said I should move in with relatives, that a woman alone couldn't manage. I decided to prove them wrong. Have you ever been in a situation where people doubted your ability just because you were a woman or because you were older? What did you do? Tell me below, because I know how it hurts when people look at you and only see weakness where there is strength. The days after the funeral were a daze. I moved through the house like a ghost, doing what needed to be done automatically. I prepared food I had no desire to eat, washed clothes without feeling the water on my hands, prayed without believing anyone was listening. At night, lying in the bed that now seemed too big, I would take my recipe book and flip through it, rereading the notes about our life together. Arthur brought home a little radio as a gift. The 10th of May, 1971. Martin's first day of school. Arthur cried in secret. The 15th of February, 1968. We fixed the roof together. Arthur fell and twisted his ankle but laughed the whole time. The 23rd of January 1975. Every page a memory. Every memory a stab in the heart. It was fear that pulled me out of that state. Fear of not being able to keep my children in school. Fear of losing the rented house. Fear of failing everything Arthur and I had built together. It's often said that fear can paralyze, but for a mother, it can be the most powerful fuel in the world. This is the moment Clara's grief transforms into grit. Her fight to keep her family afloat is just beginning, and it's a story of sheer sacrifice and strength you won't want to miss. A week after the funeral, I dried my tears, tied my hair in a firm bun, put on my best dress, a simple blue one I had sewn myself, and went out looking for work. First, I went to the houses where I had cleaned before, then to the downtown stores, offering my sewing services. I had learned well from my mother and from years of making and mending clothes for the family. Finally, I left a note at the neighborhood bakery, offering to sell homemade sweets. At first, I only got small, low-paying jobs. I would clean one house in the morning, another in the afternoon. I'd come home exhausted to cook, do laundry, and keep the house in order. On weekends, I'd spend hours in the kitchen making sweets I had learned from my grandmother: fudge, apple butter, coconut macaroons, and fruit leather. Naomi helped when she could, between her teaching classes and internships. Logan got a part-time job at a stationery store, contributing what he earned to the household expenses. Martin sent a little of what he saved from his scholarship from Richmond. It was little, but every penny counted. Over time, my sweets became known in the neighborhood. Mr. Franklin's bakery started ordering regularly, then a downtown pastry shop did too. Soon I was getting orders for parties, baptisms, simple weddings. Every recipe, every trick, every secret learned from my grandmother Genevieve, I carefully noted in the notebook, along with the amount received, the customer's name, whether they liked it or had any criticism. Too sweet for Mrs. Joyce's taste. Use less sugar next time. Apple butter for Mrs. Kimberly's son's birthday party brought in $32. Make more often. At the same time, my sewing work also grew. I started with small repairs, hemming pants, fixing broken zippers, sewing on buttons. Soon I was altering dresses, making custom curtains, even sewing simple clothes from scratch. 3 years into my widowhood, I managed to save enough money to buy a used Singer sewing machine, an old dream Arthur and I had. I remember running my hand over that shiny black metal, feeling it was a victory not just for me, but for us. In my notebook, I wrote, "Bought the Singer today. Arthur would be proud. Le 10 à 7 juin, 1987. The years went by, the children grew up, and life followed its course like a river that doesn't stop, even when there are rocks in the way. Martin graduated from law school and started practicing in Richmond. He rarely came to visit, always busy, always with important cases, always with excuses. Naomi became an elementary school teacher, married an accountant from a neighboring town, and had 2 beautiful children who were my darlings. Logan graduated with a business degree and went to work for a company in Chicago. Of the 3, he was the one who called the most, who sent the most money without me asking, who seemed to never have forgotten the sacrifices I made for them. I stayed in the same rented house, with my sweets, my sewing, my recipe book increasingly filled with stories between the lines. Over time, I adapted my grandmother's recipes, creating variations, experimenting with new flavors. The notebook became a curious mix of past and present, with old grease-stained recipes alongside more recent creations, and in the margins, life happening. My first grandson was born, Caleb, Naomi's son, the 7th of April, 1990. Martin came to visit after 2 years without showing up. He seems like a stranger. The 25th of December, 1992. Logan sent money to fix the roof. Said it's an early birthday present, the 13th of March, 1996. It was when Martin was about 35 that he started showing more interest in my things, as he called them. He was already an established lawyer in Richmond, had married a girl from a good family, in his words, and was building a promising career. On one of his rare visits to Roanoke, he sat with me at the kitchen table and spoke with that formal tone he had acquired in the courtrooms. "Mom, you're getting older now. You need to organize your papers, your accounts, think about the future." He talked about the pension I was already receiving peanuts, but it helped about a small piece of land Arthur had left on the outskirts of town, an inheritance from his father that we never had the money to build on, and even a life insurance policy I had forgotten about. Let me take care of this for you. It's too complicated, too much bureaucracy. With my legal knowledge, I can handle it all more easily. At the time, I found his sudden interest strange, but a mother's heart is foolish. I thought, finally, Martin is worrying about me. I let him open a joint account for my pension to be deposited directly. Let him take the land documents to regularize the situation. Let him take over the household expenses because it's more practical this way. Mom. Little by little, he took control of everything, always with explanations that seemed to make sense. You don't need to worry about these bank things. It's too stressful. The money grows more if invested the right way. I understand these things. I'll keep your documents in the safe at my office. It's safer than this old house. And I, trusting the son I had raised with so much sacrifice, let it happen, accepted it, and became dependent without realizing it. When I look back now, with the wisdom that only pain brings, I see the signs I ignored. The visits that became rarer, except when he needed me to sign some paper. The pension money that never seemed to be enough for me to buy what I wanted. The questions that were answered with impatience, as if I were a foolish child. But they say love is blind, and a mother's love is even blinder. I let it happen, noting everything in my little recipe book, as I always had, but without realizing that those notes would one day be the proof of my own son robbing me, little by little. The years passed in the blink of an eye. It seems that as you get older, time gets faster. Before I knew it, I was over 70, and my children were well established in their lives, each on their own path. Martin, there in Richmond, a renowned lawyer, big house, new car, 2 children in private school. Naomi had moved to Norfolk with her accountant husband, their boys already teenagers. She visited once a year, usually at Christmas, bringing nice gifts and stories of life in the coastal city. Logan, my youngest, was even farther away, in Chicago, working for one of those multinationals with a complicated name, married to a girl from Illinois whom I only knew from photographs. Every now and then he'd send a package, some extra money, but visits were a rare thing. It was around this time, when I was about 75, that Martin started showing up more. Suddenly, my son, who barely had time to call on Mother's Day, started coming to Roanoke every month. At first, I thought it was remorse, that he had finally realized his mother wouldn't last forever. He would arrive with grocery bags, pay the overdue bills, take me to the doctor when I needed it. Mom, you're at an age where you can't be alone, he'd say in that courtroom voice. Let's organize your things. And he did organize them. First, he suggested I move from the house I had lived in my whole life to a small rented apartment closer to downtown. It's more practical, Mom. Closer to the pharmacy, the grocery store, the health clinic. Then he convinced me it was better for my pension money to be deposited directly into his account. That way I can pay the bills automatically. You don't have to go to the bank and stand in line. Finally, he gathered all my documents: ID, Social Security card, voter registration, the deed to the little plot of land Arthur left, and took them to his office in Richmond. I'll keep everything in a safe, Mom. It's safer there. To be honest, I didn't mind these changes much. I was tired of taking care of everything by myself. The new apartment was small but clean, and had no stairs, which helped my legs, which weren't what they used to be. The pension had never been much, so it didn't make a difference who managed that pittance. What really mattered to me was that after so many years of being practically forgotten, my eldest son finally seemed to care about me. He would call me 2-3 times a week to see if I had taken my medicine, if I was eating properly. It was almost strange, all this sudden care. But a mother's heart is foolish, isn't it? We so want to believe in our children's love that we accept any crumb. It was during this time that I started feeling strange pains in my belly, on the right side. At first it was occasional, then it became more frequent, stronger. I tried my teas, my prayers, the home remedies I learned from my grandmother Genevieve, but this time, it didn't work. When I told Martin, he immediately got worried. Mom, that could be your gallbladder. I'll make a doctor's appointment for you. And he did, through one of those simple state health plans for seniors. The doctor was young but attentive. He examined me, ordered blood tests and an ultrasound. When the results came back, he confirmed, "Mrs. Miller, you have gallstones. You'll need surgery." I was scared. I won't deny it. Surgery at my age is no joke. But the doctor assured me it was a simple, routine procedure, that I would be in the hospital for 2 days at most. When I told Martin, he immediately offered, "Mom, I'll take care of everything. I'll schedule the surgery. I'll come pick you up. I'll stay with you at the hospital." I felt a warmth in my heart. My boy was finally acting like a son. He handled all the details, the date of the operation, the hospital admission, the insurance authorizations. On the scheduled day, he showed up at my apartment early, suitcase in hand. "I've packed everything, Mom. I brought a clean nightgown, a toothbrush, everything you'll need for the hospital." I put my belongings in a small bag, placed my recipe book on top. I never left home without it, and we went to Roanoke General Hospital, the public hospital in Roanoke. The admission was smooth. They filled out a bunch of papers, put me in a bed in room 213, where there was already another patient, a lady even older than me, dozing with her mouth open. Martin stayed with me until it was time for surgery, holding my hand, assuring me that everything would be all right. When the gurney came to get me, he gave me a kiss on the forehead and said, "I'm going to take care of a few things while you're in surgery, Mom. When you wake up, I'll be back." I was wheeled down the white corridors with that sentence echoing in my head, not knowing it was the last truthful thing my son would ever say to me. There are few things more powerful than a mother's hope, and at this moment, Clara is full of it. She believes she is finally being cared for, never suspecting that she's being carefully placed into a trap. That promise to return is about to be broken, and what follows is the beginning of a long, painful silence. The surgery went well, according to the doctors. I woke up still groggy from the anesthesia, with a dull but bearable pain, and the first thing I did was look for Martin in the room. He wasn't there. He must have gone to get some coffee, I thought. The hours passed, afternoon fell, night came, and there was no sign of my son. A young nurse with a girl's face came to change my IV drip and asked, "Isn't your family coming today, Mrs. Miller?" I tried to hide my concern. "My son must be stuck at work, dear. He's a lawyer, you know how it is." She nodded without much conviction and left the room. That night I slept poorly, waking up at every noise in the hallway, thinking it was him arriving. The next morning, the doctor made his rounds, examined my stitches, and said everything was healing well. "You can be discharged tomorrow, Mrs. Miller. You just need someone to come pick you up and sign the papers." I nodded, trying to hide the panic that was beginning to grow inside me. Where was Martin? Why hadn't he come back? I asked a nursing assistant to use the reception phone to call his cell. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. We tried his office number. The secretary answered politely, "Mr. Miller's office. He is in a meeting right now and cannot be disturbed. Can I take a message?" I left a message. He never called back. The whole day passed like that. Me, lying in that hospital bed, watching the clock on the wall, counting the hours, making up less and less convincing excuses for myself. There was an emergency at work. His phone died. Was there an accident on the highway? Anything but the truth that was already beginning to form in my mind. A truth too ugly to accept. My son had abandoned me there on purpose. On the third day, when the doctor came with the discharge papers, I had to confess, "Doctor, I can't reach my son. I have no way to go home alone." The doctor frowned, made some notes in my chart. "We'll give it one more day, Mrs. Miller. Sometimes unexpected things happen." But in his eyes, I could read what he was really thinking. Another case of an elderly person dumped at the hospital by their family. It wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. It was on this fourth day that the nurse, Sharon, came into my room. Unlike the others, she wasn't just professional. She sat on the edge of my bed, took my hand in hers, looked into my eyes, and said what I already knew but didn't have the courage to accept. "Mrs. Miller, I don't think they're coming back." The sentence fell like a stone on my chest. I couldn't answer. I just squeezed her hand as the tears silently streamed down my wrinkled face. I didn't cry out loud. I didn't make a scene. It was a different kind of pain, a silent pain, the kind that finds no comfort even in tears. The days dragged on, and the truth became clearer and clearer. When I completed a week in the hospital, the social worker came to talk to me. A young woman with a clipboard in hand and a look that mixed compassion with embarrassment. "Mrs. Miller, we haven't been able to contact any of your children. The numbers you gave us either don't answer or go to voicemail. Do you have any other relatives, any friends who could come and get you?" I shook my head. I had no living siblings. The few relatives I had left in Floyd were elderly like me. Neighbors in the new apartment? I barely knew them. I had just moved in. "So what happens now, miss?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The social worker sighed, uncomfortable with the situation. "We'll keep trying to contact your children. In the meantime, you'll stay here, but you need to understand that the hospital has rules. You've already been discharged. The bed is needed for other patients." I got the message. I was a nuisance, an administrative problem that nobody knew how to solve. In the following days, I was moved from room to room. From 213, I went to a small room used as a storage closet, then to a corner of the women's ward, then to a gurney in the hallway. I was moved according to the hospital's needs, like an old piece of furniture that nobody wants, but also doesn't have the heart to throw away. It was during this time, when I had been in the hospital for 2 weeks, that Sharon brought the news that extinguished my last hope. "Mrs. Miller," I asked the guy from the front desk to stop by your apartment address. I had given her the paper with the address, hoping someone could go there, get some clothes, see if there was a message from Martin. The guy said the apartment is empty. No furniture, nothing. And the building manager said that your son handed over the keys almost 2 weeks ago, saying you had gone to live with him in Richmond. In that moment, I understood everything. It wasn't just abandonment at the hospital, it was a plan. While I was in surgery, Martin emptied my apartment, returned it to the landlord, and disappeared with my belongings. He probably also cleaned out my bank account, though I would only confirm that later. It was a perfect crime. A sick, elderly woman, without documents, without money, without a home, without witnesses. Who would believe my word against that of a respected lawyer? A devoted son who took care of his mother. The pain of betrayal was so great I thought I would die right there, that my heart couldn't take it. But it did. We endure more than we imagine, even when the will to live fades. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. I adapted to that ghost life inside the hospital. I learned the schedules, the routines, the places where I could stay without bothering anyone too much. I realized that if I made myself useful, they would tolerate my presence more. I started helping in the laundry, folding clean sheets, then in the kitchen, drying dishes, organizing trays. I wasn't an employee, I didn't get paid, but in return, I earned a bit of respect, an occasional smile, sometimes even an extra piece of bread at breakfast. If you're wondering how someone can endure almost 2 months living in limbo inside a hospital without going crazy, the answer is with a whole lot of Appalachian stubbornness. If my story has already made you indignant up to this point, press that like button with the same force I clutched my old recipe book every night to keep from crying. I created a routine to keep from going completely insane. I'd wake up before 5 a.m. when the hospital was still sleepy. I'd take a quick shower in the communal bathroom, washing carefully so as not to use too much water or soap, which I borrowed from the cleaning staff. I'd fix my hair in a simple bun, put on the same clothes from the day before, which I had washed in the sink at night and dried on the windowsill, and fold the sheet they lent me to sleep in some corner. I'd hide my little bag with the recipe book and the few things I had left in a locker in the laundry room, where a kind-hearted employee had given me a spot. Then I'd set out through the corridors looking for tasks I could do before the day's hustle and bustle began. A hospital has a life of its own, that you only discover when you spend a lot of time there. There's the night shift, quieter, with nurses who walk like cats through the corridors, speaking softly, checking monitors in the dim light. There's the early morning shift change, with its whispered reports, its patient stories passed from one team to another. There's the start of the morning with the noise of coffee carts, the smell of disinfectant from the janitors, the doctors arriving in a hurry with their clipboards. Each moment has its rhythm, and I learned to fit into all of them like a silent shadow, moving along the edges, existing without being noticed. But the most important part of my routine, what really saved my sanity, was the patience. especially the older ones, the terminal ones, those who, like me, received few or no visitors. I started visiting the wards during the dead hours of the afternoon, when visitors had already left and boredom weighed heavier than pain. I would sit on the edge of their beds and talk, or rather, listen. I listened to entire life stories of lost loves, of distant children, of dreams that never came true. In return, I told my own stories. I talked about my childhood in the country, about my grandmother Genevieve and her knowledge of herbs, about Arthur and our simple but happy marriage, about the children when they were little and still loved me. I never spoke of the recent abandonment, of Martin's betrayal. That pain was mine alone, kept like a wound you don't show. One of the patients who marked me the most was Mr. Harold, a man in his 80s with terminal lung cancer. He was hospitalized for almost 3 months while I was there. He received a visit from his daughter on Sundays, just for an hour, because she lived far away and had small children to care for. The other days, it was just him and the disease, consuming his thin body with each difficult breath. I started visiting Mr. Harold every afternoon at 4 o'clock sharp. He would wait for me, his already weak eyes shining when I entered the room. "Mrs. Miller, what story are you going to tell me today?" And I would tell stories, real stories from my life, stories I had heard from others, sometimes even stories I made up on the spot. He would listen attentively, as if each word were a more effective medicine than the morphine dripping into his vein. Another special patient was Mrs. Dorothy, a lady who had suffered a stroke and spent months in the hospital waiting for a spot in a nursing home, since her family couldn't or wouldn't care for her at home. Dorothy couldn't speak well because of the stroke, but she understood everything. I would comb her white hair every morning, help feed her, read passages from the Bible that a volunteer had left. We understood each other without needing many words. She would squeeze my hand when she wanted to say thank you, and I would squeeze back to say, "You're welcome." When they finally found a spot in a nursing home for her and came to get her, she cried, holding my hand. And I cried too. It was like losing a friend, a sister that fate had given me in that unlikely place. The nights were the hardest part. When the activity slowed down, the lights went out in the corridors, and the silence fell heavy over the hospital. That's when the loneliness squeezed the most. I would look for a quiet corner, a chair in an empty waiting room, a bench in a less busy hallway, sometimes even an unoccupied gurney, if I was lucky. I'd take my recipe book out of my bag, run my fingers over the worn calico cover, open it to the yellowed pages. I had nothing more to write there. I no longer made sweets, no longer lent money to ungrateful children, had no news to record. I just reread the old pages, like someone visiting a country that no longer exists. It was on those nights, alone with my notebook, that I cried all the tears I held back during the day. I cried for the abandonment, the betrayal, the helpless old age, the lost years raising children who didn't deserve my love. After almost 2 months in this situation, I officially became the old lady of the hospital. The doctors would greet me in the hallways. Some even asked for my opinion on difficult elderly patients. "Mrs. Miller, you have a way with the elderly. Do you think you can convince Mr. Franklin to take his medicine?" The younger nurses sometimes mistook me for a long-time employee, asking me for information about routines or the location of rooms. The long-term patients saw me as a kind of guardian angel, someone who brought a bit of humanity to that cold, impersonal environment. In a way, I had built a place for myself in that non-place. It wasn't a life I would have chosen, but it was the life that was possible at that moment. The attempts to contact my children continued for a while, more due to the social worker's insistence than any hope of mine. Martin never answered the calls, never replied to the messages. Naomi, when they finally managed to speak with her, said she couldn't get involved. Logan, from Chicago, was the only one who showed some concern, but claimed he was not financially able to come to Roanoke or to take me to live with him. When the social worker asked about the empty apartment, the bank accounts, my documents, none of them knew or wanted to answer. It was as if I had simply evaporated from their lives, becoming a problem no one wanted to take on. It's a heartbreaking irony, isn't it? In the daytime, Clara is a source of comfort for the forgotten, yet at night, she's the one who is truly alone. With all doors to her past now firmly shut by her children, it seems like this is where her story will sadly end. But sometimes, help arrives from the most unexpected of places, just when all hope seems lost. It was around the 2-month mark of my stay at the hospital that I began to notice changes in the administration. A new social worker arrived, recently graduated, with that energy of someone who still believes they can change the system. Her name was Megan. Unlike the other professionals who treated me like a case to be resolved, she sat down with me in a room, offered me a decent coffee, and asked questions, many questions, not just about my children, my documents, my current situation. She wanted to know about my whole life, where I was born, what my childhood was like, how I met my husband, how I raised my children. She seemed genuinely interested, not just following protocol. When I showed her my recipe book, her eyes lit up. She asked to see it, carefully flipping through the worn pages, reading some of the notes in the margins. "Mrs. Miller, you recorded everything here? Loans, promises, important dates?" I nodded. "It was my way of remembering, dear. When you get old, your memory fails. But what's written down, no one can dispute." Megan asked to keep the notebook for a few days. I hesitated. That notebook was all I had left. My history, my memories, my life in the margins of recipes. But something in the young woman's eyes gave me confidence. I handed her the notebook, only asking that she take good care of it. In the days that followed, I noticed a different buzz among the hospital staff, whispers, glances in my direction, quick and encouraging smiles. Sharon, the nurse who had been my ally from the beginning, let it slip that things were moving to resolve my situation. I didn't quite understand what that meant, but I felt a tiny spark of hope spring up in my chest after months of thinking it had died completely. Her face radiated a contained joy, like someone holding on to good news for the right moment. "Mrs. Miller, I need to speak with you in private." She led me to that same small room from before, but this time there was a man in a suit waiting for us. "This is Mr. Wallace, a lawyer from the Legal Aid Society. He wants to help you. What happened next would completely change the course of my story, but that's a matter for another moment." In the 2 hours that followed in that small hospital room, Mr. Wallace opened a briefcase full of papers, documents, and copies in front of me that seemed to tell a story that not even I fully knew the story of my own life. Megan sat beside me, holding my recipe book open to several pages marked with colorful sticky tabs. "Mrs. Miller," the lawyer began, adjusting his glasses on the tip of his nose. "Miss, Megan has done investigative work that few police officers would. With the information from your notebook, we were able to track down several irregularities." His voice was calm, professional, but you could feel an indignation beneath the polite words. He explained that my recipe book, with its seemingly innocent notes in the margins, was powerful evidence against my own son. The dates, the amounts, the promises recorded over the years told a story of financial manipulation that I, blinded by a mother's love, had failed to see completely. "Look here." Megan turned the notebook towards me, pointing to a note from 6 years ago. Loaned $4,000 to Martin to renovate his office, said he'd pay it back in 6 months. The 15th of April, 2015. She turned a few more pages. Martin asked to transfer the deed to Arthur's land into his name. Said it makes it easier to sell later. The 5th of January, 2019. And another one. Signed some papers for Martin today. Said it was to make it easier for my Social Security to go directly into his account. I didn't really understand, but I trust my son. The 23rd of September, 2020. The lawyer then took other documents from his briefcase. "Mrs. Miller, based on these notes, we investigated and discovered some very serious things. First, the land you inherited from your husband was never officially sold. It's still in your name in the city records. But your son built a small house there, without your knowledge, and has been collecting rent for over 2 years. My heart clenched. That little piece of land was the only thing of value Arthur had left. It was on the outskirts of Roanoke, near where they had now built a gas station. At the time, it seemed worthless, but with the city's growth, it had become quite valuable. Martin had said he sold it for peanuts, that it barely covered some old debts. And now I discovered he hadn't sold it at all, that he was collecting rent from a house I didn't even know existed. There's more, the lawyer continued, showing other papers. Your Social Security wasn't just used to pay your bills, as your son claimed. In the last 3 years, only a third of the amount was used for expenses related to you. The rest was regularly transferred to his personal account or to a company called JB Investments, which we discovered is owned by your son. Megan spoke up, more indignant than the lawyer. And the worst part, Mrs. Miller, we found documents showing he was trying to sell the land now with a power of attorney that you signed, thinking it was for something else. But since the buyer, a construction company, required your presence at the final signing, he needed to get rid of you, so to speak. He needed you to disappear. The full, ugly truth is finally on the table, and it's colder than anyone could have imagined. With the entire scope of her son's betrayal revealed, Clara now faces a choice: crumble under the weight of it all, or fight back with everything she has. Her next decision will define the rest of her story, so don't go anywhere. It was like being slapped in the face, a slap that blurs your vision and makes your ears ring. It wasn't just abandonment. It wasn't just my son's cruelty or neglect. It had been a coldly calculated plan. Admit me for a simple surgery, leave me at the hospital, disappear with my belongings, my documents, my money. Meanwhile, he would sell the land using that power of attorney, pocket the money, and I no longer mattered in his scheme. An old woman without documents, without an address, without money, whom nobody would believe if she showed up later telling this story. Mrs. Miller, the lawyer said more gently now, seeing my state of shock, we have a solid case of embezzlement, elder financial abuse, and abandonment. Your son not only diverted your Social Security for years, but also misappropriated assets that legally belong to you, based on the evidence that Miss Megan collected. We can file a lawsuit immediately and request a protective order. I couldn't say anything for a few minutes. The words seemed to have fled my mouth, trapped by the pain tightening my throat. When I finally found my voice, it came out almost as a whisper. But why? Why would my son do this to me? I gave him everything I had. I did laundry for others to pay for his college. Megan held my hand. Unfortunately, Mrs. Miller, this happens more than we imagine. Children who see their elderly parents as a burden, or worse, as a source of resources, especially when there are assets involved. She hesitated as if choosing her words carefully, and in your son's case, it seems he has serious financial problems. We found records of large debts, unpaid loans. He needed money and used what you had. The lawyer cleared his throat, returning to his professional tone. You have 2 options now. We can file a criminal lawsuit, which could result in prison for your son. Or we can focus on the civil part, seeking to recover your assets and ensure your financial security from now on. The decision is yours. I shook my head, stunned by it all. I need to think. It's too much to take in at once. Megan nodded sympathetically. Of course, Mrs. Miller, take all the time you need. But know that you are no longer alone in this fight. That night, I sat on a bench in a quiet hospital corridor, clutching my recipe book. The weight of my son's betrayal was crushing, and a part of me wanted to simply give up. But then I thought of my grandmother Genevieve, who taught me that a woman must fend for herself. I thought of Arthur and the life we built on honesty. I thought of all the other forgotten souls in that hospital. Letting Martin get away with this wasn't just an injustice to me. It was an insult to everything I had ever believed in. When the sun rose, a new resolve had settled in my heart. I found Megan as soon as she arrived. I'm ready to fight, I told her, my voice steady for the first time in months. Not for revenge, but for justice. As they packed up the documents, she added, "Oh, I almost forgot. We found this in your apartment." She handed me a small box. The building manager kept it when he realized the apartment had been emptied suspiciously. Inside the box were some old photos, my marriage certificate with Arthur, a rosary that had belonged to my mother, and to my surprise, my original birth certificate, which I thought was lost long ago. He must have left it behind, thinking it had no value. But for me, having my name on an official document again felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Whatever the case, it was a relief to have at least one official document with my name back. I spent the whole night awake, sitting on a bench in the quietest corridor of the hospital, the recipe book open on my lap, staring without seeing the yellowed pages. Everything I had discovered swirled in my head like a whirlwind, Every gesture from Martin that I had interpreted as care now revealed its true intention. The more frequent visits when he realized the value of the land, the insistence on controlling my accounts to help me, the calls that he stopped making as soon as he had everything he needed in his hands. How could I have been so blind? When the day dawned, I had made my decision. I looked for Megan as soon as she arrived at the hospital. "I want to fight for my rights," I said, my voice firmer than I felt inside. Not for revenge, but for justice. And not just for me, but for all the elderly who are treated like trash after they are no longer useful. The following days were a flurry of action. Megan and Mr. Wallace built a strong case, gathering all the evidence. They filed for emergency injunctions to block any sale of my land, to freeze the accounts where my pension was deposited, to prevent Martin from selling off any assets he might have bought with my money. They even got a court order for him to hand over all of my documents he still had. While the legal process was underway, Megan found a temporary spot for me in a shelter for the elderly, run by a church. It wasn't a dream place, but it was much better than living hidden in the corners of the hospital. I had my own little bed, a small closet to store the few things I had, and meals at regular times. Most importantly, I had dignity. I no longer had to hide, to apologize for existing, to take up space that wasn't mine. But the hardest part was yet to come. After nearly a month of preparation, the day I had been dreading arrived, the face-to-face confrontation with Martin. Megan and Mr. Wallace thought it was important for me to be present at the settlement hearing, which was an attempt to resolve the case before it went to trial. I trembled, just thinking about facing my son after everything I had discovered. How do you look into the eyes of someone who came from your own body and decided to throw you away like a squeezed-out orange? How do you face the most painful betrayal there is, that of your own flesh and blood? The hearing was scheduled at the courthouse in Roanoke, but 2 days before, we received a call from Martin's lawyer. He proposed a preliminary meeting at my son's office to resolve the situation in the best possible way for everyone. Megan and Mr. Wallace exchanged a suspicious look but decided to accept. "Let's see what he has to say," the lawyer explained. "If it's a serious settlement offer, we can consider it. If not, we proceed with the lawsuit." On the scheduled day, I dressed as best I could with the little I had. I wore the only decent dress I had received from donations at the shelter. I carefully combed my hair into a simple bun. I put on a light shade of lipstick that Megan had given me. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. I wanted my son to see me with my head held high, not as the abandoned and humiliated old woman he expected to find, if he even expected to see me alive. Martin's office was in a commercial building in downtown Roanoke, one of those modern ones with a mirrored glass facade. I had never been there before. At the reception, a young woman in a gray suit received us with that cold politeness of someone who treats people like numbers. "Mr. Miller is waiting for you in the conference room." We followed her down a decorated hallway with expensive abstract paintings to a large room with a dark wood table and leather chairs. And there he was, my son. Martin looked older than his 40-something years. He had deep dark circles under his eyes, a pale face of someone who hadn't been sleeping well, his shoulders tense under the expensive suit. Beside me, I felt Megan stiffen, as if containing her anger. Mr. Wallace maintained a neutral, professional expression. Next to Martin was another man, also in a suit, who introduced himself as Mr. Scott, his lawyer. "Mom," Martin began, his voice strangely small for that imposing room. I didn't answer. I couldn't. It was as if a knot had formed in my throat, preventing any sound from coming out. Mr. Wallace took the lead. We are here at Mr. Miller's request. We understand you have a proposal to prevent this case from going to trial." My son's lawyer cleared his throat, arranging the documents in front of him. "Yes, we do. My client acknowledges that there were misunderstandings in the management of Mrs. Miller's assets. He is willing to return a portion of the pension funds that may have been used improperly and also to transfer the ownership of the land back to her name." Megan let out a sound of disbelief. "Misunderstandings? You call abandoning your own mother in a hospital after surgery a misunderstanding? Emptying her apartment? Keeping all her belongings, documents, savings? Collecting rent on a property that wasn't even his for over 2 years? That has a name, counselor. Several names, in fact, all defined in the penal code. The atmosphere in the room grew tense like a guitar string about to snap. Martin's lawyer shot an irritated look at Megan, then returned to his professional tone. As I was saying, my client is willing to make amends. In return, he only asks that the matter be resolved discreetly, without a lawsuit. After all, a scandal like this benefits no one. Mrs. Miller certainly wouldn't want to see her own son's name in the police blotter, would she? For almost 2 months, I had been a ghost, silent and invisible. But in that sterile conference room, listening to them barter over my life like it was a piece of property, my voice returned, not as a whisper, but as a force I hadn't felt in years. "Protect him?" I said, the words cutting through the air. I pushed my chair back and stood up, my old bones protesting but my spirit soaring. I looked directly at my son, forcing him to meet my gaze. "Martin, you didn't just throw me away, you tried to erase me. You left your mother to wander the halls of a hospital, hoping she would simply disappear. You are worried about your name? What about my name? The name you tried to strip from me along with everything else? Mom, it wasn't like that. I was going to come back to the hospital, but things got complicated. Debts, problems." His voice trailed off, the excuses sounding hollow even to himself. "Lies." I cut in, feeling a strength I didn't know I still had. "You were never coming back. You emptied my apartment the same day you left me at the hospital. You had it all planned, and now that you're caught, you want a little deal to save your own skin." Mr. Wallace intervened, his tone firm. "Let's be clear. Your offer is insulting. We aren't just talking about returning stolen funds. We are talking about the profound emotional distress caused by the nearly 2 months Mrs. Miller spent living like a homeless person in a hospital, the result of a systematic attempt to erase her existence." There was a tense pause. Martin's lawyer checked some numbers on a calculator, whispered something to my son, who nodded reluctantly. "Very well. In addition to the land and the return of the pension funds, my client offers compensation of $30,000 for emotional distress and commits to paying the rent for an apartment for Mrs. Miller for a period of 1 year. Megan snorted in disbelief. "Do you really think $30,000 compensates for the nearly 2 months she spent living like a ghost in that hospital? It's not just about the lack of money or shelter, it's the humiliation. It's sleeping in corridors, hiding your belongings in laundry closets, and eating leftovers, all while knowing you've been discarded. And for what? So her son could maintain a lifestyle with money that was rightfully hers." The room fell silent for several seconds. Finally, Martin lifted his eyes, not to me, but to his lawyer. "How much do they want? Let's just get this over with." It was then that I made the decision that would change everything. I stood up slowly, resting my trembling hands on the expensive wooden table. "I don't want any deal. I want justice. I want everyone to know what you did. I want your clients, your friends, your neighbors, everyone to know what kind of man you are. A man who abandons his own mother for a piece of land. What kind of lawyer can be trusted if not even his own mother can trust him?" This is the moment the woman they tried to erase roars back to life. By choosing justice over a quiet settlement, Clara has just declared war on her own son. The stakes have never been higher, and you won't want to miss what happens when this fight is taken to the courtroom. The little color left in Martin's face drained away. Lawyers live by their reputation, and he knew a scandal like this could destroy his career. "Mom, for God's sake, don't do this. Think about the family, about what other people will say." "Family?" The word came out of my mouth like a choked scream. "What family, Martin? The one you destroyed when you threw me away like an old piece of furniture? The one you betrayed when you stole the little I had? That family ended the day you left me in that hospital, knowing you weren't coming back." When I finally confronted my own son in that office, full of luxuries bought with my money, he offered me a deal to avoid the scandal. Many told me I should accept it. After all, family is family, but I chose to fight to the end. Do you think I was too harsh? What would you do if you discovered your own son planned your abandonment to take your inheritance? We left that office with no deal. In the hallway, Megan held my arm as my legs gave way. It wasn't physical weakness. It was the emotion finally finding an outlet after being contained for so long. "You were incredible in there," she whispered. Mr. Wallace agreed, impressed. "In 30 years of practicing law, I have never seen such dignity in the face of such betrayal." Leaving that office, my legs trembled, but my soul had never felt steadier. Confronting my son wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my own voice. Sometimes in life, you must fight not because you hate the person in front of you, but because you love your own dignity. In the weeks that followed, the case moved through the justice system. My case ended up catching the attention of the public prosecutor's office, which decided to file a criminal action alongside our civil suit. The judge, a man with graying hair and a stern gaze, granted all the preliminary injunctions we requested, freezing Martin's assets, prohibiting him from selling any property, and ordering the immediate return of all my documents and belongings he still possessed. The subsequent investigation revealed even worse things. It wasn't just the land and my pension. Martin had taken out loans against my pension in my name, using the power of attorney he had tricked me into signing. He had sold all the furniture and objects from my apartment, including family heirlooms I cherished, mementos of Arthur that were priceless. We also discovered that the abandonment at the hospital had been meticulously planned. He studied the system. He knew the public hospital couldn't just throw me out on the street, that I would remain in administrative limbo for months long enough to complete the fraudulent sale of the land, which only failed because the interested construction company insisted on seeing me in person before closing the deal. While the case was proceeding, I received some news that warmed my heart. The patients at the hospital, to whom I had told stories during my months of confinement, had left letters of support. Sharon, the nurse who had been my friend from the beginning, gathered the testimonies. There was a letter from the daughter of Mr. Harold, the man with terminal cancer whom I visited every afternoon. "You were an angel in my father's life in his last months. He spoke of you with such affection, of the stories you told, of the company you provided when no one else could be there." There was a letter from a young doctor, Mrs. Miller helped calm the more agitated patients in a way that not even medication could. Her presence brought humanity to a place that often seems too cold. And many others, from nurses, from other patients who had been discharged, even from the cafeteria worker who let me help in the kitchen with the trays. Megan organized the letters in a beautiful envelope and handed them to me, emotional. "You have no idea the impact you had in that hospital. These letters are proof that, even in the worst circumstances, you never lost your humanity." That night, at the shelter, I read and reread each letter, tears streaming silently down my face. I had spent so much time feeling like a burden, a problem, a nuisance, and now I discovered that even in that terrible situation, I had managed to make a difference in other people's lives. The final judgment took place almost a year after the day Megan and Mr. Wallace appeared in that small hospital room. It was a tense, tiring day, full of legal terms I barely understood. Martin was there, looking 10 years older, avoiding my gaze. He had lost weight. His hair was thinning at the temples. His posture stooped, like someone carrying an invisible weight. A part of me, that motherly part that never completely dies, felt a pang of pain seeing him like that. But another part, the one that had learned the hard way to protect itself, remained firm. The verdict was read in the late afternoon. The judge, in a solemn voice, declared, "I order the defendant to fully restore all funds diverted from the plaintiff, with interest and monetary correction, from the date of each misappropriation. I order the immediate return of the property located in the Santa Rita district, including all rent payments received over the last 30 months. I further order the defendant to pay compensation for moral damages in the amount of $80,000. There were more technical orders, more numbers, more details that Mr. Wallace carefully noted down. But what struck me most were the judge's final words, looking directly at Martin. "There is no crime more repugnant in the eyes of this court than abandoning those who gave us life and to whom we owe everything. You had the opportunity to resolve this matter with dignity and chose the path of denial until the end. Let this serve as a lesson. Justice has been served, but there's no celebration in a victory like this. The legal battle may be over, but the question remains, how does someone like Clara begin to rebuild a life and heal from such a profound wound? The next chapter of her journey is perhaps the most important one. so keep listening. When we left the courthouse, the sun was setting, painting the Roanoke sky in shades of orange. I felt strangely empty. There was no joy in a victory against my own son. There was no satisfaction in seeing him publicly humiliated, even after everything he had done to me. There was only a deep exhaustion that comes from the soul and a quiet relief for having defended my dignity to the end. Megan and Mr. Wallace took me for coffee at a nearby bakery. "And now, Mrs. Miller?" Megan asked. "What do you want to do? You can go back to the land, build a house there, or we can look for a small apartment downtown with the compensation money. You decide." I looked out the bakery window at the bustle of the city that had been my home for so many decades, at the people rushing by, unaware of the small but great battle that had been won that day. "I want to go back to the land," I finally replied. "That piece of ground holds Arthur's history. It holds the memories of our dreams together. I'll live in the little house that's already built there, the same one my son was renting out without my knowledge. I don't need luxury. I never have. I just need a place that is truly mine, where no one can take me away." Mr. Wallace nodded in approval of my decision. "It's a sensible choice. The house is already there, ready. With the compensation money and the back rent, you can make any renovations you want, furnish it your way. There will still be a good amount left to save for the future." "And what about Martin?" I asked, my voice faltering a little as I said my son's name. "What will happen to him now?" Megan and the lawyer exchanged a quick glance, one of those that says a lot without words. "In the civil case, he will have to comply with everything the judge ordered. Return the land, pay the compensation, restore the diverted funds. In the criminal case, which is separate, he will likely get a sentence of community service, perhaps even house arrest, depending on how the prosecutor handles the case. He will also lose his license to practice law, at least temporarily." I nodded in silence, digesting the information. There was no vengeance in my heart, only the certainty that justice had been done. "And the others?" I asked. "Naomi, Logan, do they know what happened?" "They know," Megan confirmed. "We tried to contact them throughout the process. Your daughter remained distant, said she didn't want to get involved. Your youngest son showed more concern, even offered financial help when he learned of the situation, but said he couldn't come to Roanoke because of work. I wasn't surprised. It was what I expected. Naomi had always been more reserved, more concerned with her own family. And Logan, despite being the most affectionate of the three, had built his life far away, in Chicago, focused on his own world. Neither of them had actively participated in what Martin did, but neither had they cared enough to check if I was okay when I simply disappeared after surgery. Deep down, their neglect hurt almost as much as Martin's deliberate betrayal. 3 days later, Megan and Mr. Wallace took me to see my house, the one that existed on Arthur's land that I didn't even know had been built. It was a simple, small, but well-made building, with 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. It even had a little backyard where I could plant some herbs, maybe even an apple tree, like the one we had on the farm in my childhood. When I opened the door and walked in for the first time, I felt a mix of emotions I can't quite explain. Anger for having been deceived for so long, relief to have a place to call my own again, fear of what life would be like from now on, hope that maybe, with time, the wounds would begin to heal. "Welcome to your home, Mrs. Miller," Megan said, with that sincere smile that had given me back hope when all seemed lost. As I took my first step across the threshold, I drew a long, deep breath. The air in that house seemed to carry the scent of past deceit, yet also the fragrance of a new beginning. How ironic that the very place meant to be an instrument of my son's greed was now to become my sanctuary and my place to heal. Life truly is a strange river. "My home," I repeated, feeling the weight and comfort of those words. My home, my corner, my new beginning at 79 years old. Today, 3 years after that day at the courthouse, I am sitting on the porch of my little house, watching the sunset paint the Roanoke sky with shades of orange and pink. The Mill Mountain Star stands out on the horizon, majestic as ever, a silent witness to so many stories of this city, including mine. I am 82 years old now. My hair is completely white, tied in a simple bun, my hands marked by time and work. but my eyes, my friends say, shine with a renewed vitality. This house, which was once an instrument of my son's greed, is now my peaceful refuge. It's not large or luxurious, but it has what I need. 2 small bedrooms, one for me, one for guests, a cozy living room, a kitchen where I spend hours preparing my sweets, and a yard where I've planted a little bit of everything: mint, rosemary, basil, lavender, even a small apple tree, which with any luck will bear fruit for me to pick in this lifetime. The walls, which were once a dull beige, are now painted a light blue, the color of the sky on a sunny day. In the windows, curtains of colorful calico that I sewed with my own hands. On the simple but well-kept furniture, embroidered doilies and arrangements of flowers from the yard. It's not much, but it's mine, and no one will ever take it from me again. When I moved here 3 years ago, the house was practically empty. The tenants Martin had placed here without my knowledge had left only the basics: a bed, an old stove, a table with 2 chairs. Little by little, with the money from the settlement and the back rent, I began to build my home again. Each piece chosen with care, each corner arranged my way. Megan, the social worker who became a lifelong friend, helped me find good furniture at a fair price. Mrs. Miller, you deserve a house that reflects who you are, warm and full of life. My recipe book, the very one that became a key piece of evidence in the case against Martin, has an honored place on a shelf in the living room. But it's no longer just a recipe book. For the past 2 years, I've been using it in another way. The new pages I've added don't have measures of flour or baking times. They have memories. I am writing the story of my life, from my childhood in the country to the present day. Not to be published, not to become famous, but to leave a record so that those who come after me will know who Clara Thompson was, what she lived, what she learned, how she survived. If I had done this before, I commented one day to Megan, when she came to visit and saw me writing, maybe I would have noticed the signs of what Martin was plotting. She shook her head. You couldn't have known, Mrs. Miller. He was your son, the person you trusted most. I replied with the wisdom that only years and pain can give. That's exactly why I'm writing now, to make it clear that loving doesn't mean being blind, that trusting doesn't mean handing over everything without question, that being a mother doesn't mean accepting anything in the name of love. Life takes more unexpected turns than a carousel at a fair. Who would have thought that at 82, after everything I've been through, I would be starting over? But that's what I've been doing, day after day. And I'm not alone on this journey. Little by little, I've gotten to know other seniors who live nearby. There's Mrs. Dorothy, 84, a widow like me, who lives with her daughter down the street. There's Mr. George, 79, who was a bus driver his whole life and now raises canaries in his backyard. There's Mrs. Helen, 87, who still crochets despite the arthritis in her hands, and her widower friend, Mr. Eugene, 89, who can barely see but has the memory of an elephant for telling stories of the old days. At first, it was just occasional encounters at the bakery, the small market, and the neighborhood park. But I soon realized we all shared a similar loneliness. That's how our little group was born. One Sunday, I invited Mrs. Dorothy for coffee. The following week, she brought Mr. George along. Then came Mrs. Helen with her friend. Soon, there were 5 of us seniors sitting on my small porch, drinking coffee with cornbread, talking about everything and nothing. We didn't talk about illnesses or complain about absent children. We talked about life, about good memories, about plans that were still possible, about the small daily joys that only those who have lived a long time know how to appreciate. The gatherings grew. Mr. Eugene brought a deck of cards, and we started playing pinochle on Thursday afternoons. Mrs. Helen taught cross-stitch to the other ladies while the men discussed politics or baseball. I started making cookies and sweets for the get-togethers, old recipes from my grandmother Genevieve that were in the notebook. Soon, my house became the regular meeting spot, twice a week, Sunday after Mass and Thursday afternoon. What started as coffee between neighbors turned into a small chosen family, an informal support group where everyone helps each other without having to ask. You should charge admission, Mr. Franklin joked one day, seeing the full house. I replied instantly. My mother always said that a house is like a heart. The more people it can hold, the richer you become. And it's true. After 8 months of living like a ghost in a hospital, every laugh that echoes off my walls is like a miracle. Every shared cup of coffee is a blessing. Every animated game of Pinochle is proof that we are alive, present, that we matter. The meetings at my house gave me an idea. I asked Megan if there was a way to use my cooking skills to help other people. She, always helpful, put me in touch with the neighborhood community center. On a Tuesday in March, I started giving free cooking classes there. Nothing too complicated. I taught simple, economical, nutritious recipes. How to make a tasty cake with few ingredients. How to use peels and stems that usually go in the trash. How to stretch the meat when money is tight at the end of the month. At first, only 3 or 4 people showed up, mostly young women who wanted to learn to cook better for their families. Over time, the class grew. Today, I have 15 regular students of all ages, from 1 6-year-old girls to ladies older than me. One of my most dedicated students is a 6-8-year-old widower who had never even fried an egg before losing his wife, of Mrs. Miller. "You saved me from starving to death or living on ramen noodles," he told me one day, proud after successfully making a perfect roast chicken. The classes at the community center reconnected me with a part of myself I thought I had lost. That Clara who loved to teach, to share knowledge, to see the satisfaction on someone's face when they learned something new. Every Tuesday is a special day for me. I wake up early, pack the ingredients I'm going to take, and put on a nice outfit, no going all frumpy, as if it doesn't matter. And I walk to the center, which is about a 15-minute walk from my house. The walk does me good. Exercise for the body, fresh air for the lungs, greetings to the neighbors who already know me. But of all the new beginnings I've had in these last 3 years, the one that moves me the most is my volunteer work at Roanoke General Hospital. Yes, the same hospital where I lived for nearly 2 months after I was abandoned. Many people ask how I can return to a place that holds such painful memories. The answer is simple, because it was also there that I found humanity when I needed it most. It was there I met Sharon, the nurse who was the first to tell me the truth about my abandonment. It was there I talked with lonely patients, gave comfort to those who were suffering, and found a purpose even on the darkest days. Every Wednesday, without fail, I go to the hospital, bringing a basket of homemade sweets, shortbread cookies, molasses cookies, fudge, and soft coconut macaroons, all made with my own hands, and a lot of love. I go through the wards, especially those with elderly patients or those the staff tells me don't receive visitors. I sit, talk, offer the sweets, listen to stories, and tell my own. Sometimes I bring a book and read aloud to those who can't read for themselves. Other times, I just hold the hand of someone who is scared, in pain, or homesick. The first time I went back to the hospital as a volunteer, I had butterflies in my stomach. What if they treated me like an intruder? What if the memories were too strong? But I was welcomed with open arms. Many of the staff still recognized me, Mrs. Miller, from the hallway, as they used to call me. The difference is that now I entered through the front door, with my head held high, as an official visitor, no longer hiding in the corners like someone who has no right to exist. Sharon, who still works there, cried when she saw me. "You coming back here after everything to help others. That is true greatness of spirit. It takes a special kind of strength to return to the scene of your deepest trauma, not with anger, but with kindness." This is the ultimate proof that Clara didn't just survive. She transformed her pain into purpose. Her story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and there are more just like it waiting to be heard. I don't know if it's greatness. To me, it's just doing what's right, giving back a little of the good I received, even in the worst of times. It's showing that life can have meaning at any age, in any circumstance, proving, especially to myself, that I am not just a victim of someone else's cruelty. I am the protagonist of my own story, until the very last chapter. One of the sweetest surprises of these last few years has been the reconciliation with my daughter Naomi. When the scandal of the abandonment and the lawsuit against Martin broke, she kept her distance, claiming she didn't want to take sides. It hurt me, of course. What side was there to take between a mother abandoned in a hospital and a brother who planned that abandonment to take her inheritance? But over time, I understood that Naomi has always been like that. She avoids conflict at all costs. She hides when things get difficult, preferring to pretend problems don't exist rather than face them head-on. It was last Christmas that I received an unexpected call. It was her voice hesitant on the other end of the line. "Mom, it's Naomi. Are you doing okay?" We talked for almost an hour. She told me she had separated from her husband, that her children were grown and independent, that she had moved from Norfolk to a smaller town, closer to Roanoke. She didn't mention Martin or the lawsuit, but she asked if she could visit me. "Of course you can," I replied. "This house will always have its doors open for you." She came the day after Christmas, bringing a store-bought cake and a simple gift, a wool shawl she had made herself. When we saw each other, it was awkward. We didn't know how to act, but soon the ice began to break. I showed her the house, told her about the senior group, the cooking classes, the hospital work. She listened to everything in silence, her eyes welling up. At the end of the visit, as she was leaving, she hugged me tightly and said softly, "Forgive me, Mom, for not being there when you needed me. Forgiveness is a process, not a moment," I told her. "I'm learning to forgive, daughter, one day at a time. And you can help me in that process by being present from now on." Since then, Naomi has been visiting once a month. She brought her children, who are now teenagers and barely recognized me. Little by little, we are rebuilding a relationship that, if not perfect, is at least honest. She never asks about Martin, and I respect that boundary. Every family has its taboos, its subjects that are best left in silence. As for Martin and Logan, the story is different. I have never seen or spoken to my eldest son again. I heard, through mutual acquaintances, that he lost his law license for a time, that his office closed, that he moved to another state. I don't know if he is well, if he is happy, if he ever truly regretted what he did. A part of me, the mother that never stops being a mother, still worries. Another part, the woman who learned to protect herself, knows that distance is the only possible protection against certain types of betrayal. Logan, my youngest in Chicago, calls every now and then, promises visits that never happen, sends gifts on important dates, asks if I need anything. It's the most proximity he can offer. With his busy life in the city, his demanding job, his family that barely knows their grandmother, I've accepted that this is how it will be. I don't demand what people can't or won't give. Life has taught me that expectations are the shortest path to disappointment. If there's one thing I've learned in my 82 years of life, especially after everything I've been through, it's that every day is a gift that cannot be wasted on bitterness. I won't lie and say I don't have moments of sadness, of anger, even of self-pity. I do. There are nights I cry into my pillow, thinking about what it would be like if my children were different, if my Arthur were alive, if life had taken another course. But I don't let those moments dominate me. When the sun rises the next day, I get out of bed, wash my face, and move on. There is always a sweet to be made, a plant to be watered, a visitor to receive, a story to tell. Life doesn't stop because of our pains. If someone were to ask me the biggest lessons I learned from all this, I would say there are 3. First, document everything. My recipe book with its notes in the margins is what saved me. If I hadn't had the habit of recording every loan, every promise, every important date, I might never have been able to prove what Martin did. Words fly away, paper remains. Especially in the digital age, when everything seems so fleeting, having physical records, documents, tangible proof can make all the difference. Second lesson, trust, but verify. Love should not be blind. Loving someone, whether it's a child, a husband, a friend, doesn't mean handing over your life, your decisions, and your money without question. It doesn't mean giving up your autonomy. Trust is important, but verifying that this trust is being honored isn't distrust, it's prudence. Especially for us seniors, whom the world insists on infantilizing, on treating as incapable of deciding our own lives. Third and most important lesson, it's never too late to start over. At 79, when I found myself abandoned in a hospital, without documents, without money, without a home, I thought my life was over, that there was nothing left but to wait for death to arrive. But I was wrong. Today, at 82, I have a richer, more meaningful life than I had before. I have friends I've chosen, a routine that satisfies me, a purpose that moves me. It doesn't matter the age. It doesn't matter how difficult the situation seems. It is always possible to turn things around. It is always possible to start over. My story is not unique. All over the United States, thousands of elderly people face abandonment, disrespect, and loneliness. Many are not as lucky as I was to find people like Megan, Mr. Wallace, and Sharon, who extended a hand when I needed it most. Many wither away in nursing homes without visitors, in hospitals with no prospect of discharge, in empty houses where silence is the only company. If my story serves to make one person look more closely at the elderly person in their family, at the white-haired neighbor who lives alone, at the lady who sits on the same park bench every day, then it will have been worth telling. The journey of forgiveness is not a straight path. It is like my garden, requiring care every day. I don't forgive the act itself, because the scar my son left will forever be a part of me. Instead, I am learning to forgive myself for having been so trusting, and to release myself from the burden of resentment. Liberation isn't about forgetting the pain, but accepting it as a part of my life story, and not allowing it to overshadow the present. Every day, I choose peace. My story is a journey of reclaiming peace. If you want to hear more stories of healing and hidden strength, please subscribe to the channel